Morning. Today I'm going to be discussing the geography of the United States and give you a basic overview of our great nation. Basics of U.S. geography. Okay, we are the third largest country in the world, about half the size of Russia, 1/3 the size of the continent of Africa, half the size of South America, and we are about 2.5 times the size of Western Europe. This should give you an idea comparatively of how big we are compared to other nations. Regions and time zones in the United States. There's the Northeast region here, the South Atlantic, Eastern Central, Western South Central, Pacific Mountain, and then the West North Central or East North Central. Basically, we break our country into 3 sections, East, Central, and West here. The topography. What is our land like? Okay. As you can see here from this map, the topography of the United States varies greatly depending on where you are. We have several mountain ranges, the Appalachian Mountains here on the east, and the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevadas on the west. There's lowlands along the coastline, the Great Plains in the central United States, and of course the Great Lakes. Contour of the United States, this cross section here gives you a good idea of our nation. The primary feature here along the western edge with the Rocky Mountains, Sierra Nevada Mountains, and then you see here the flat central United States and the much smaller Appalachian Mountains on the east coast. Okay, the topography of the Northeast here. In the Northeast you have just the tip of the Appalachian Mountains and several other small mountain ranges here. Elevation not too high, not too many flat areas, and of course you have a little bit of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario here. Where do we consider the difference between the North and South? Traditionally, it's been what's called the Mason-Dixon line, which you can see here clearly on the map. That's been used as the dividing line between the North and the South. Just an arbitrary line here. The topography of the Southeast. The Southeast, you see the bottom half of the Appalachian Mountains. You get into the lowlands and the swampy areas of Florida, the Atlantic coastal plain here. And then the farther west you go, you get into some of the Great Plains here in Oklahoma and Arkansas and northern Texas. Topography of the Midwest. Midwest is dominated by the Great Plains and the Great Lakes here. Several major rivers flowing through it, including the Mississippi and the Missouri River. As you can see here with the Great Plains here, this area shaded here in the 2 different purples are the Great Plains. The primary area for growing crops, wheat, corn in the United States here. Topography of the West. The West here is dominated by the Rocky and the Sierra Mountains here. As you can see by the darker colors represented on the map, they represent higher elevations. And then as you get to the Pacific coast here, you get a lower elevation along the California coastline here and down in here into southern Arizona. Bodies of water. Again, the Atlantic Ocean here, Gulf of Mexico, Pacific Ocean, Great Lakes, and several major rivers flowing through the United States. Water was used as an early form of transportation for many settlers. Chesapeake Bay, Great Salt Lake, Lake Okeechobee, several major lakes. And this just shows you how many rivers we have in the United States. These are only the major rivers also. There's many smaller rivers not represented here. The Hudson River, Potomac, Mississippi, Ohio River, Missouri River, Arkansas River, Colorado River, and the Columbia River. And then Alaska here we have the Yukon River. The Rio Grande separating the United States from Mexico, and the St. Lawrence River, which gets people from the Great Lakes out into the Atlantic Ocean. The greatest river is the Mississippi River, kind of splits our country in half here, also known as the Big Muddy, 2,350 miles long, drains all or part of 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces, and covers 40% of the United States there as far as areas that it touches drainage. The Great Salt Lake, located in Utah, 2,000 square miles, not a very deep lake, between 10 and 28 feet deep, and 6 times saltier than the oceans. You would definitely not want to take a drink of this. Lake Okeechobee in Florida, kind of a swampy area. not what you consider a traditional lake as far as going out and boating, more of a sportsman's type lake in Central Florida. And the Gulf of Mexico here, you can see many oil rigs out in the center of the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of fishing and a lot of vacation places down in the Gulf of Mexico. Mountains and plateaus. Okay? We have the Appalachian Mountains, which we've discussed here on the East Coast, the Adirondack Mountains, which are a continuation of the Appalachians, the Rocky Mountains on the West Coast, the Cascades up through Oregon and Washington, and the Sierra Nevadas, which dominate California, and the Alaskan Range in Alaska. Mount Whitney, located here on the edge of California and Nevada, and Mount McKinley, the United States' highest point in Alaska. Pikes Peak, and the Continental Divide here, which you can see here represented by the green line on the map in the upper left-hand corner. It separates the United States as far as drainage, where water is going to drain to the East Coast or the West Coast. The Great Plains are located here in this central area. The Atlantic Coast Plains here. The Gulf Coastal Plains. And the Great Basin. Okay. Major deserts in the United States. You have the Mojave Desert. And here's an example of the Mojave Desert. Very flat, very dry, not much vegetation, and not many people are going to inhabit this area. Vegetation. Okay, here's a representation of the different kinds of vegetation we have in the United States. Varies from tropical forest to tundra to mixed forest, grasslands, and everything in between. Wetlands located in the United States. Every one of these dots represents some type of wetland in the United States, whether it's a marsh, a swamp, or a bog. Lots of different wetlands in the United States. Problems we have geographically. Earthquakes. We have quite a few earthquakes in the United States, especially along the Pacific Coast in California and the San Andreas Fault, but not limited to that. And also, many people forget all the seismic activity we have in Alaska. Tornadoes, primarily focused in the Great Plains and the central United States, but you will get them in other areas here, and the frequency in Texas, Oklahoma, and some of the other central plain states you can see is quite frequent. Hurricanes. Here's Hurricane Camille's damage, the storm of the century. The Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast suffers from hurricanes, usually yearly, if not several times a decade. This was August 17, 1969. It was a Category 5 and killed 412 people. This has been a general overview of geography in the United States of America. Hopefully this has been a help. Thank you.